and welcome to the NBA Minutes to Win It podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Jason Gilbo at JGilbo11. Only a 4-game slate tonight, of course, because it's Tuesday, and the NBA only wants us to have good slates on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. But either way, it's not a bad 4-game slate. There are plenty of options. So we'll talk, of course, about each position and injury concerns. There aren't 1,000 of them like there were last night, but there's still a couple. Derrick Rose, questionable / game time decision, day-to-day, whatever you want to call it. All sorts of different reports. So his status obviously going to be important for guys like Jimmy Butler, but he has sat out the last 3 games. So in a game against Milwaukee, they should win anyway. Maybe they take cautious approach, but we'll have to see. Deron Williams, of course, is questionable for this one. Played 20 and 21 minutes after missing 4 games, but obviously his status is going to change things for guys like JJ Barea. D'Angelo Russell was sick yesterday, sent home from practice. He's questionable for tonight anyway. He's not a guy you're probably playing anyway other than just to be different, but certainly bumps up guys like Lou Williams and Jordan Clarkson in this one.
Yeah, and especially if Kobe sits as well, that kind of just limits the guards to Jordan Clarkson and Lou Williams in the back there. So they would handle pretty much all the minutes they can see, which would be nice. And that would be what you'd be getting, even in a possible blowout.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we look at the top of point guard, of course, you got Steph Curry against the Lakers, which if the Lakers were a halfway decent NBA team, this would be the ideal matchup. But somehow the line sitting at only 13, maybe that's because Vegas just kind of knows that Curry's not going to play in the second half. But I don't know why that line's so small, especially with the fact that Kobe Bryant might not play. Or maybe they're realizing that the Lakers will be more competitive if Kobe Bryant sits, which is probably the case. But either way, Curry could certainly get 50 fantasy points in 2.5, 3 quarters. But technically 1 game removed from an injury after missing 2 previous games. I just don't see him playing a ton of minutes. I'll still throw him in a couple tournaments because he's the best shooter the world has ever seen, and he can certainly fill it up in a hurry. But I'm not going to have a ton of Curry tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you probably actually, for some reason, Curry would be actually the contrarian move tonight, as odd as that sounds, because I think everyone's on the same boat of probably not going to play him in the blowout. I mean, he did go off against them last time, but obviously for 10K, you kind of want more than 50 fantasy points from those guys. And he came close, 24, 9, and 4, 2 steals. But I think there's 2 options that we like, Rondo and MCW, for a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, and we're certainly not saying don't play Steph Curry.
Yeah.
We're saying, like, he's not a cash game guy because, I mean, the likelihood that he's playing into the fourth quarter is not very high. But especially, closely removed from an injury. But like you said, Rondo, MCW, if you had Rondo last night, you probably made some good money, and I guess it's, technically a revenge game for him, but not really. He already played him once. And 7,800, though, for a guy who's playing as well as he's playing right now. And he's not even scoring a lot of real points. He never really did. But monster game last night. He's not worried about playing big minutes. He always does because, I mean, Darren Collison's going to get his 28 to 30 anyway. But Rondo against whoever's playing point guard for Dallas, Deron Williams, JJ Barea, doesn't really matter. None of those guys very good defenders. And you got to imagine that Rondo, especially the way that Cousins is playing right now, I mean, just passing the ball to DeMarcus Cousins 10 times is probably getting you 10 assists tonight.
Yeah, and has Cousins figured it out? I mean, it looks that way. I mean, he's coming off 2 really good games, and if that Phoenix game would have stayed close, he easily would have been over 60 fantasy points. But I think that duo is probably going to be really popular tonight against Dallas, who's, I guess, a better than average defense, I could say. I mean, not great. They're definitely not going to keep me off those Kings, but...
Yeah, and Zaza's a good defender, but he's not an athletic defender. And, I mean, I'll bump down most players against him, but I'm not bumping down Boogie against him, especially Boogie's usage rate over 34% now. I mean, he's the one player I'll probably have in every single one of my lineups. He's not quite the Westbrook from last night. And if you faded Westbrook, good for you for getting lucky, but that was still the wrong play. But either way, Cousins, I mean, on a 4-game slate, I mean, you're hard-pressed to fade him, and I won't be.
Yeah.
Michael Carter-Williams, we mentioned. Whether Derrick Rose plays or not doesn't really matter for MCW because Rose hasn't been a great defender this year anyway. But 9 of his last 10 games, he's played at least 31 minutes, and in all but 2 of those games, he's got over 30 fantasy points and upwards of 40 in a lot of those as well. So at $6,700 on both sides, he's going to be a really popular play. And I'm not saying you have to play him in cash games, but you don't really have many better options around that price, especially with a lot of uncertainty. So I think for me, I'll probably be going Rondo, MCW, and cash games on FanDuel. As much as I hate to say it, I might have to duck later. Stuff thrown at me on Twitter, but MCW's been good.
Yeah, it has been, and his price hasn't really gone up and adjusted to his recent play, and maybe they were just anticipating him going back down once Jared Bayless came back, or once Jason Kidd was giving orders from his hospital room of saying MCW's done, stop playing him.
Yeah,
but I'm all over him tonight. I mean, solid matchup. I mean, Chicago hasn't been great against point guards this season, so his price is great for what he's been doing.
Yeah, you got to imagine he's going to be one of the more popular plays tonight. And of course, JJ Barea, we kind of mentioned him in passing. If Williams sits out, he's certainly going to be a popular play also. Shooting guard, obviously the only real injury here is Kobe Bryant. Didn't practice yesterday, is questionable. Sat out the last 2 games because he's really, really old. So maybe he doesn't play tonight. We'll see. It's probably going to be another one of those game time decision type of things with him, which is unfortunate, especially with this being the late game. But there's still plenty of value on the Lakers because they play a very concentrated number of guys that get fairly big minutes. So guys like Lou Williams should be pretty safe anyway. And I mean, Lou Williams is playing great. Obviously, he's going to have a much tougher matchup today against Golden State and Klay Thompson and company. But, I mean, the guy's played 36 minutes a game his last 4 games, 27, 29, 34, and 46 fantasy points. You imagine somewhere in that range. Probably nowhere near the 46, but probably a safe bet to get you 25 to 30. And I think he's got to easily be one of the best shooting guard plays tonight.
Yeah, I really like Lou Williams. I mean, like you said, the matchup's not great, but, I mean, fast-paced game like this, especially with all those injuries, he'll easily see 30-plus minutes again. And, I mean, for that price, I really can't fade him in all formats.
Yeah, agreed. Wesley Matthews is a shooting guard against Sacramento, and he's a good shooting guard. Sorry, Dion Waiters, that is facing this team. And Wesley Matthews is actually shooting really well recently. Not a huge peripherals guy, but he's never been a huge peripherals guy. But he's also a guy that doesn't turn the ball over. Last 3 games, 35, 31, and 26 minutes. 0 turnovers in those 3 games. And 68 minutes in the prior 2 games, 2 total turnovers. So obviously this is a guy that he's more of a cash game play than a tournament play. But on a night like tonight, in that great matchup, they're going to need somebody to score. And he has easily the best matchup of any of those guys. So wouldn't be surprised to see him somewhere in the 25 to 30 fantasy point range, which at a position that's pretty top heavy makes him still one of the better values of the position.
Yeah, I'm with it there. I mean, any shooting guard against the Kings is going to be on my radar, unless you're Dion Waiters, as you mentioned. But, I mean, Wes Matthews has been shooting the ball great, like you mentioned, 50% from 3, 50% from the field. So if he can just nab a couple assists or a couple rebounds, maybe a steal or 2, he'll be in for an easy 30 fantasy point game tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And against some of these terrible shooting guards that the Kings throw out there, maybe a couple blocks as well if we're lucky. Jimmy Butler, obviously, coming off of a Michael Jordan-esque game, actually better than Michael Jordan, technically, with the 40 points in the second half. Do keep in mind he scored 2 points in the first half in that game. But either way, he's playing very, very well. 28, 23, and 42 real points last 3 games. Obviously, he gets a little bit of a bump down as far as usage goes if Rose does play. But either way, he's easily your safest option at shooting guard as far as the top guys go, because you do have Klay Thompson, the potential blowout, although he's absolutely on fire right now as well. So I think you could play either guy. Klay Thompson seems like one of those guys who we've even seen him get run late in, I think it was a 30-point game a week or so ago, playing late in the game. Obviously, that was due to some foul trouble to some other players. But Klay Thompson's probably going to be, I would imagine he's easily going to play more minutes than Steph Curry tonight. So if you're taking a chance on one of those 2 guys, we'll get to Draymond Green later, I would probably take a chance on $3,000 less and go with Klay Thompson.
Yeah, I mean, he's been really good lately. I mean, for the last 5 games, he's had 40-plus fantasy points, and obviously any matchup against the Lakers is a good one. But, I think he's a nice tournament play, especially on DraftKings where he's just $100 less than Jimmy Butler. So it's a nice pivot and probably a better matchup, I guess you could say, especially if Rose comes back. So Thompson definitely more reserved for GPPs if you're paying up.
Yeah, I agree there. And then I know a guy that you like, and I'm on board too, Kent Bazemore. Been doing it all. I mean, 3 games against Indiana, 8, 9, and 6 with 2 blocks, and then next game 26, 3, and 4. So the guy has shown that he can kind of do it all, and he's reasonably priced. So he's another really good mid-range option at shooting guard.
Yeah, I like him. I like him a little bit more on DK where he's a small forward, just because small forwards absolute crap tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of the crap, we'll go ahead and just get this one over with quickly. Amr Caspi obviously sat out last night with back soreness, and hopefully he's back for tonight because I need people that I can actually play in my lineups without wanting to throw up. So hopefully he can get back in this one and play, but if not, I mean, your options are pretty limited. You got Chandler Parsons against, as we know, a Sacramento team that refuses to play defense. Parsons, not a guy I'd play in cash games tonight because he's had a very low floor, but he's still seeing upper 20s, if not mid 30s in minutes, and he's a mid-range price, and it's a good matchup for him. It's just whether or not he takes advantage of it, because we've kind of seen him be fairly passive recently. But you got to imagine, especially with Rondo and Cousins playing the way they are, someone's going to need to score the ball to keep this one close. So I still think that Chandler's a good GPP play tonight.
Yeah, definitely, especially coming off his last game where he had a great matchup against New Orleans and fell short with just 6 points. So I'm sure people will be off of him.
Yeah.
And he is a guy who can go for 30 plus fantasy points on any given night. So I think for that price, definitely worth a look in GPPs.
Certainly. Rudy Gay, I guess he's more of a cash game option. He's just been bad. He doesn't have upside, really.
Is he your nemesis from last night?
I mean, no. CJ Miles is my nemesis from last night. But, I mean, Rudy Gay, I guess, relative to his salary, he was bad. He wasn't horrible. I mean, 23 fantasy points isn't a lineup killer necessarily, depending on how many shares you had. But, I mean, he's an okay play because there's not many other great options, and he's still priced reasonably. You imagine he could easily get to about 30 fantasy points here, especially with Rondo dropping 20 dimes a night right now, it seems. But I still just not a guy that I'm overly excited about playing tonight, because I just don't think he has much upside.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, just going any lower, it's kind of tough. I mean, you got the Golden State guys, Harrison Barnes, Andre Iguodala, who give you a pretty low floor, I guess you could say, probably around that 15 to 20 mark. I mean, they don't have a lot of upside, so I wouldn't use them in tournaments.
Yeah. And, of course, speaking of tournaments, you can play Carmelo Anthony, who, coming off the last game, took his lowest shot attempts of the season against the Hawks last time out. So you don't imagine he's only going to take 10 shots again tonight. People probably look at that game log and think, I mean, it wasn't a terrible game, but didn't pay off his salary. He certainly has upside. So he's a guy that I think will be lower owned than he should be, especially at a really weak position. So I'll definitely have a couple shares and some GPPs there.
Yeah, he's averaged 40 DraftKings points in 3 games against Atlanta this season, so he's a decent look. And I think for that price, he's probably gives you your best option of scoring more than 40 plus than any other small forward tonight.
Yeah, and then one more guy who's a small forward, power forward, Nikola Mirotic. He's played 60 minutes in the last 2 games, 41 and 23 FanDuel points. Certainly a guy with a low floor, but a guy that can contribute across the board, so he can definitely pay off his cheap salary. Especially at small forward on FanDuel, I like him, assuming that Rose sits out. If Rose plays, then there's not quite as much offense to go around.
Yeah, and he's been hot from 3, 7, and 12 in the last 2 games, so definitely like him if Rose sits. But
yeah,
I guess small forward, I mean, you're kind of limited anyway. You could toss him in a GPP.
Yeah, I agree with that. Power forward options, pretty top-heavy, but there's also a couple super values, and the middle is awful. You got Draymond Green up top, who is, I mean, he's a machine. Triple-double, triple-double, triple-double in his last 3 games. He's got 4 in his last 9. I mean, even with Steph Curry back, the guy is just a machine. He just does it all. And we have seen him get some run late, even when it is a blowout. So that's kind of a concern due to his price tag, not necessarily due to his performance. But it's going to be tough for him to pay that off. But, I mean, you imagine that his floor is just about as good as anyone, even if he only plays 3 quarters. So certainly a guy you're going to want exposure to, but I'm hesitant to say that he's a must-play in cash games on this short slate, though.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think going to balance a little bit cheaper, because there's guys like Pau Gasol and Paul Millsap that are in great spots as well, have been just as good. Well, not just as good, but who have been good.
Yeah.
For 2,000 or 3,000 less. So not a must play, but he's so good.
Get yourself some Draymond Green, though.
Yeah.
If you only play one Warriors player tonight, it should probably be Draymond Green.
Definitely, yeah.
Paul Millsap, like you mentioned, he's such a great all-around player. You look at his last couple games, 19-9-6 with 5 steals. In the game before, 22-13 with 5 blocks. Then the game before that, 4 steals. I mean, the guy just does everything. 4 straight games, over 40 fantasy points on FanDuel, right around 45 to 55 on DraftKings each of those times. So he's expensive, but he might just be your best cash game play if you can't quite afford Draymond Green at power forward tonight.
Yeah, I really Paul Millsap, especially in this matchup with the Knicks. He's averaged 17, 6, and 9 in 3 games against them, with 4.3 steals per game. So his defensive stats really add to his floor and ceiling. And if anyone can come close to Draymond Green, if he just puts up his average triple-double game, it's Millsap.
Yeah, absolutely. And then right behind him, this is obviously only a FanDuel play as far as power forwards go, because he's a center on DraftKings, although a lot cheaper. Pau Gasol, 8,700 on FanDuel. He's under 8K on DraftKings. And he's just been really consistent. And among the players on tonight's slate, only Steph Curry and DeMarcus Cousins average more fantasy points per minute than Pau Gasol. So obviously with Noah out, he's seeing a few more minutes. So obviously you like that. 34. He only played 29 against New York, but only really needed to play 29. So if this game remains close late, which it certainly could, especially if Rose sits, you expect Pau Gasol to be around 35 points. And he did go for 46 and 18 against this team last year. Obviously it's not the same team, but certainly Pau Gasol's got that huge upside because he can do it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty close. And actually, you got to think they downgrade a little bit defensively with Greg Monroe down there. So, yeah, I mean, I like Gasol tonight. He's an easy play, especially on DK where he's a center at just 7,800. I think he's kind of your only center option you feel good about.
Yeah, especially because he and Cousins are switched on the two sites.
Yeah.
And then as far as cheap options go, of course, Taj Gibson playing around 30 minutes a night. He's a fine punt. And then Bobby Portis for even cheaper than him. He's easily the more GPP play because his minutes aren't quite as locked in. But per minute basis, he's been great recently. And then I know there's one other guy you mentioned that I hadn't quite even considered enough, but that was a mistake on my part.
We were talking about Larry Nance here?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, he's really been good. He's been good, but you never feel good recommending a guy named Larry Nance Jr. to people out there. But
especially when he's going to play some minutes against Draymond Green, because I wouldn't play very many players against Draymond Green, except that he's cheap.
Yeah, I mean, he's cheap, and he's been rebounding the ball well, 28 in the last two games. Hasn't done much else. He scored a little bit, 15 and 8 in the last two games against cupcake opponents, I guess you could say. So, but I mean, for cheap, he's kind of that same price as Bobby Portis. So if you're looking for, I guess a tournament play with a little bit of upside, Larry Nance is not a bad idea.
Yeah, and especially with Julius Randle kind of in the doghouse right now. For whatever reason, Byron Scott said he needs to grow up. Julius Randle says Byron Scott's stupid. I mean, who knows what's really going on there? But I certainly would rather pay a little bit less for Larry Nance and save my money for the other positions.
Yeah.
At center, if you're playing on FanDuel and you're playing cash games, you're playing DeMarcus Cousins, or you're probably losing your money. But obviously, it's a different story on DraftKings. Cousins still cheap on both sides. Obviously, power forward on DraftKings, but coming off that huge game last night, and the peripherals haven't been incredible recently until last night with the 19 rebounds. But, I mean, he scored 32 or more real points in 3 of his last 5 games. And one of those you can kind of just knock out anyway because he got tossed from the Golden State game. But he's finally looking like the Boogie that we know and that has that monster upside.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with Boogie tonight. Great matchup against Dallas, who kind of an average rebounding team, and like you said earlier, I mean, he's just too versatile for Zaza down low. So, I mean, get yourself some Boogie.
Yeah. A couple other options, like you mentioned, Pau Gasol on DraftKings. Greg Monroe you can consider also. He's still only playing about 28 to 30 minutes a game right now, which is concerning.
Definitely odd.
Yeah, you don't like that, but that'll probably scare a lot of people off him, so he'll have a lot lower ownership than, I won't say than he should have, but fairly low ownership, I guess. And, the Bulls haven't been a great defensive team because Pau Gasol can block shots, but he doesn't jump to do that. So that's about the only positive for him. I mean, I guess you could play Zaza as a tournament option. He's been really good. I mean, incredibly consistent, even though his minutes have been 36, 24, 25, 35. On FanDuel, he scored 33, 33, 33, 33 in his last 4. So if you want consistency and you're going to pivot off Boogie, then I think that's a good tournament swerve.
Yeah, no, I definitely like that. And going back to Monroe, I mean, only 6,500 on DK. Against Chicago, who's giving up the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing centers. So, I mean, he's been great fantasy points per minute-wise still, but like you said, the minutes have been a little low. So definitely a little bit risky, but I guess 6,500 is not a bad risk to take.
Yeah. One last guy. This guy always seems to be really low owned, especially on short slates, because at times he does have a very low floor and his minutes are kind of strange. But Al Horford, we know we can fill it up. I mean, in a really tough matchup against Houston, went for 30 and 14 and 53 FanDuel points. So just know that he has a lower floor than he'd probably like, especially, if we see the old Knicks tonight in Atlanta kind of gets out to a big lead. But Al Horford can fill it up just as well as Paul Millsap, and he's always tends to be way lower owned than he should be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's still a cheap price tag. So, I mean, against the Knicks team that's not great defensively, their pace of play is more the reason why they limit fantasy production. They're just not that great defensively, so Horford's a decent play.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll wrap things up for us here for today. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out the rest of our content at dailyfantasycafe.com.